Welcome to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Our goal is to equip listeners to become better readers of Scripture and more skillful leaders in their local churches and ministries. If you would like to learn more about Pillar Seminary and sign up to receive exclusive content from Pillar's faculty, please visit pillarseminary.org.
Hey, everybody. I'm Dan. We're back for another round of podcasts here. Thanks for joining us. I have with me today Susie, Dr. Donnell Moore, Greg Wallace, and our producer who's silent in the background, Daniel Cabral. And we're flipping the script a little bit today. We're going to interview Joe Mullarkey, who is normally a host with us. We were in a meeting recently about what sorts of ideas we had for future podcasts, and Joe brought this idea up, and we just decided, why don't you go ahead and take the reins and guide us through this conversation? It applies very much directly to, Joe, your ministry experience and your experiences as a pastor, but then also working with youth ministry in various capacities for a long time. So, Joe, why don't you, well, first of all, welcome everybody. Thanks for, thanks for being here. Joe, give us a brief rundown of what it is we'll be talking about, and then we can all dig in together.
Okay. So this all started, almost 20 years in student ministry. And then now I'm transitioning to really being a lead big church pastor, I guess you want to say. And one of the things I've noticed from being in student ministry for so long was like our kids weren't equipped when they left our church. And that's partly on the churches that we're involved in and that we're ministering in, but also like some of that has to do with the parents. And so I got real interested in just kind of tracing like the disciple making process through generations. Okay. And then that kind of threw me into this whole like realm of, well, with social media today and this sort of deconstruction movement, kids are going off to college. They're being, I don't know if attacked is the right word, from all sorts of angles on their faith. Do they really believe what the Bible says? Do they really understand what the Bible says? So it's led me to do a little research and study and just have conversations with that. And so I brought that to you, and we kind of, hashed around a few things, and here you are making me talk about it on a podcast.
Yeah. Now, I understand there's a book that has just been read that's part of this whole context as well.
Yeah. I was given the book How Not to Read the Bible by Dan Kimball, by our other pastor here on staff. And so I blitzed through that book real quick, and honestly, a lot of the things that were in the book are things that we're learning at Pillar, which is great.
Shout out. Like there you go. Thanks, right, Joe.
But it's also, it's helped me to understand a little bit on the other side of things, where the other side of, culture is coming from when they're looking at the Bible and why they're misinterpreting it and all that. And then how they're coming at, for me, our college and high school students with all of these questions or attacks or things like that. So it's really helpful. And it's something that I think can be utilized in not just student ministry settings, but also like church-wide.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the Pillar shout out. This is a perfect convergence, real life example of the sorts of things that we're trying to do with you guys, is help you apply and understand Scripture in ministry systems and settings and problem solving, contextual leadership. So, I mean, this really is kind of like a senior thesis project here almost. So I appreciate that. And I'm excited to dig in here. Susie, Greg, and Donnell, you each are also pastors or have been pastors and are also parents of kids in various stages of adulting. And Donnell is a great grandparent, so he has all the experience he's bringing to bear on this. Do you guys have anything to add to the issue as Joe's explained it? Kind of flesh this out for us from your own context and experience?
I think as a mom, as soon as my kids kind of hit middle school, they started having questions about the Bible. And I realized that my answers were just not necessarily something that I studied on my own, that it was like passed down. I learned it in Sunday school or Bible study or whatever. And so that really started me kind of digging in. So their questioning was actually a good thing, even for my own walk. And Pillar ended up being the avenue that the Lord led me on in order to have a safe space to ask questions, so that I could pass that on to my kids.
Oh man, yeah. As a parent of a now in middle school, I'm starting to get a sense of what you're talking about. Just an inkling of what I'm getting into. Greg, Donnell, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I come from. I didn't grow up Christian, really. I mean, it's a longer story to hash that out. But I feel like I'm coming from an outside. But I also think I came out of the womb asking why. And so, honestly, some of my first experiences within the Christian community as a whole were very positive. But my first negative experiences were really strong pushbacks to asking why in the church, within the church, and asking, well, why are we doing that? Because that's not in the Bible. And or where in the Bible, and why are you interpreting it that way and stuff? And as a younger person, I can imagine I was a little intimidating, just because I probably wasn't aware of the tone that I was using and things like that. But on the other side, I have just a huge value for asking why. If we as people of faith don't have any answers, we either need to fess up to that and be honest with it. And we should, maybe not either. That should be some of it. And then also continue to do work. There are so many amazing resources to help us have some answers. And the technical term is apologetics, which sometimes I almost want to throw out because it becomes so convoluted and philosophical and overly academic that it becomes, because key to this is the other person capable at whatever age they're at to understand the dialogue, and do you have anything to say? And so there's a bunch of stuff, but anyway, I just think the value of the challenges that are coming at us is huge, and we must, if we're going to be successful, we have to respect those questions, and I'd say even value them. So
yeah, excellent. Donnell, anything?
Yes, it was not with my children, but with my grandchildren. They have become very rebellious toward church and toward anything that has to do with faith. And they even question why we insist that they go to church with us on a regular basis. And when we try to give them the answers that we feel a person of the teen years would understand, it just it reminds me of babies, the why question. Why? And you get in this loop of why. And then you become frustrated because it appears that they are asking why just to ask why and not seeking understanding. And so it has been very difficult. Our children have given up. And so they've given us the responsibility of trying to raise up our grandchildren in the faith. And with all of the opposition and distractions that they have across the span of social media, it's very, very difficult to do.
I should say, shout out to the Torah. What we're talking about is exactly what the Torah enjoins. These love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and these things that you're learning also teach to your children. That's exactly what we're talking about here, and it's fascinating to me to see Donnell experiencing from his grandkids a version of Greg, and the questioning. You mentioned social media, though, Joe. That was something you brought up as well. You want to kind of take that and run with this new influence that we're dealing with.
It's not something that like I ever had to deal with as a middle schooler, high schooler, and I'm navigating that. I've got a sixth grader now who is begging me for a phone. And I just know what happens. Like the instant she gets that phone, like it opens up this whole new world and information like I'm not afraid of, but she's not ready to receive yet. Right. Because like the disciple making part still has to take place in our home. It's not just the church's job. Like, so in our home, I need to be discipling my sixth grader and what it means to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and I don't know, I can't speak for anyone else's context, but at least where we're at, like the idea of talking about this when we're standing and when we're sitting and when we're traveling and all of this, like it seems to have gone away. Social media has some to play with that, but it's also the proliferation of all of these other things that are going on right now. And I don't want to get on a soapbox as a youth pastor about like, you need to be in church and stop doing club sports. Cause like, I get the reality of that wrestle, but like when our kids go to college and they don't go to church and mom and dad are like, well, why are my kids not going to church in college? It's like, well, because they didn't
never habituated.
It was never a priority for you in high school, And so they're getting inundated with all this information, all these other sources of stimulus, and they don't know how to navigate that yet. So whether it's on, Instagram our attention spans are so short. So you have to be real quick with how you're teaching these kids and with reels or with TikToks or, whatever it is, like they're getting this information and then they don't know what to do with it. So they just believe it. And we're struggling with how to deal with that as a church, I think.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. This is cutting too deep, guys. It's too convicting. Lauren and I are really brushing up against our own disciple making in the home shortcomings. Right now, we've had some come to Jesus conversations with in light of our kids and our own seventh graders' desire for a phone. So this is oh man. So give me more. What are we going to do about this, gang? Help me be a better parent.
Well, and I don't want to just take all the airspace, but it's easy as a pastor to put this into practice in the church. I can set up a program and I can get volunteers to do this. And like, we've seen a disciple making multiplication happen within our student ministry over the last 5-6 years. We have, but man, it's so hard in the home. It's so difficult in the home. Shout
out to Donnell. There you go.
For sure. Yeah. That's what it was. It was, shout out to Pillar and Dr. Moore, but it was through the disciple making class that it helped to clarify, okay, it identified the problem and says, here's our solution. And so we've just been reaping the fruit of that for the last 5 or 6 years. And it's been amazing. But then translating that into the home and now to the adults. Students are getting it, but we still have a generation or two of adults that are like, they need this as well.
Well, so it's a multi-pronged problem, I guess. There is still very much a church community problem, but how this also would translate into the homes while raising these kids, trying to navigate this space is it's bonkers.
Yeah.
So
I think the ability to critically think is, first of all, really easy to say and recognize as a problem, but so much more difficult to actually implement within the life of a person. It's almost, sometimes I feel like it's almost a skill you either have or you don't. But I do still think there is some training that can be done. We don't have really time to go through some of that, but to some degree, we're talking about basic logic skills. And I'm not even talking about in the philosophical sense. I mean, the basics do show up in philosophy, but I'm talking about really practically asking, is the source I'm receiving information from a credible source? Not simply do I like the feel of the information they're giving me. So asking questions, if you're going to be one who asks questions, then we're also going to be ones who are asking questions of everything. And that's not simply let's destroy everything, because the title on here is Deconstruction. And I'm jokingly, but I think truthfully say, and this is mostly for me inclined toward young adults, look, if you're deconstructing without trying to rebuild, you're destroying. Yeah. And quit calling it deconstruction. If you're not doing any work to try and figure this thing out, then this isn't deconstruction. So I think this critical thinking skill or set of skills, and it's again longer conversation to define them, but is critical within our culture as believers. We can say how the Bible is a better ways to read the Bible, or ways that are more detrimental to read the Bible, or not getting ending with correct conclusions. But if we're not then able to take the information we have of the Bible, when it's confronted by an outside influence, which we all live in, and we can't rectify those, or we can't, on another level, live with the disagreement and work on that over time, then we're going to have problems. And if we're not teaching our kids, we're not teaching our young adults, we're not teaching our parents in our congregations that it's okay to have questions, and it's okay to not to have answers for a while, and it's really okay to work over time on these things. I think it's important.
Hey, let's take a quick break from the podcast to let you know that we are still accepting applications for the spring 2024 semester. We're accepting applications all the way up to January 22nd of 2024 to grab your spot for that spring semester. You can find out more information about the application or the process and the application itself online at pillarseminary.org/apply. And if you have any questions, we're waiting to help. Email us at admissions@pillarseminary.org.
Dan, let me just say this. Joe, one of the things I think would be helpful for you is to have your children, or the kids who are getting it, to go and begin to disciple their parents who are not getting it. Try it just as a short study and see what that does, because I really believe that the reason the parents are not going forward with it is because they don't have a motivation to do it. And if their children are going to speak Godese in their midst, comfortable using the language of God, I'm pretty sure that it will either convict the parent or embarrass the parent. And that's when that deconstructing and reconstructing can begin and emerge out of that family unit. And maybe, just maybe, they can begin sitting down doing the in-home studies together as they did in the time of Israel.
Yeah. Well, as a teacher, there's nothing more encouraging, convicting, exciting than a hungry learner, students who really want to learn. And so I think that is exactly what you're talking about. If your problem, Joe, sounds incredible that your youth really are getting it. If you could just find a way to like, I think Donnell's coming up with something really cool, a way to motivate and convict parents with hungry learners. I think that's really cool. Greg, I was thinking, it's a long time ago that I read this when I was pastoring. Matt Anderson wrote a short little book called The End of Our Questioning. And it was something to do with kind of the art of questions and being a culture of good reception to questions and not shutting them down. And I don't remember enough of it to recommend it one way or the other. It might be terrible now, but it was really helpful along these lines of just creating a culture that is safe for folks to be able to ask these questions. And
I was once at a conference and asked a question to the presenter. It was question time. It was time for questions. I didn't just stand up and say, "Hey, look at me," although that is possible, I think. But anyway, and whatever it was, the guy's response looked at me and said, "Now, are you a believer?" I mean, in a really super awkward way that the room laughed at me. And I'm bringing it up because I'm still bitter about it. I'm not. I'm unsettled about it. It's probably a better way to say it within this context. Yeah. But I had a question for Susie. Having teenagers right now who are both bright, because I know them, and I think they fit into the area of what I'd call creatives as far as point of view. My specific curiosity is about, it has to do with consistency in working it, but I'd rather hear a general kind of point of view than my, so anyway, I'm implying that direction and then saying.
Give it to us, Susie.
But yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what you're
the question
asking.
wasn't very clear, but I think bring your experience with your creative kids in this space to bear on this conversation, which I appreciate because I was going to harangue you as well to start talking more.
Well, when me and my kids, the Lord really quickly, when they started to question and even fight me on going to church, was an attitude of don't force them. And as somebody who grew up in the church, always went to church, my mom had to wrestle tights on me when I was little because we wore tights to church, kind of thing. And so, I had people tell me, nope, you got to forcefully put them in the car and take them with you. And I attempted that once, and the Lord said, you never, ever have to force them. And so then trusting God in this with their questions and the answers coming slowly. And I've learned that a lot of their answers are coming from how they see me live out my own relationship with God. Because once you get to have teenagers, you realize your voice loses any effect. But what they see you do is what they remember and what they tell their friends about, and so I've become a safe place for them to be able to ask these questions. Let's dig into it together. I don't force feed anything to them. I didn't make them go to church. My son is just now starting to go back to church, not where I work. And he's hearing great things from this pastor, and it's things that I could have said a million times, but he's hearing it from somebody else, but being okay with the process. Don't live in fear of the questions. Acknowledge those are really good questions, and be willing to work through them, but just don't shut down and think that you failed as a parent. Oh my gosh, I failed, and God's going to be so upset, and I've screwed up these kids. It's really hard to screw them up. Like, if you really love them, it's hard. So,
well, I appreciate that. I do. I am coming to understand the guilt and the shame and the insecurities that have crept in a new way to mine and Lauren's parenting now for these sorts of things. So that's an encouraging word. And Daniel, you're store these up, store these up for your little one as he grows. So
and I think both parenting. I jokingly wrote in our chat that both pastoring and parenting are the same. Know your role and shut your hole. And that's a total joke. That's not at all what I genuinely believe, but I just think it's funny. But in the sense that pastoring and parenting have a similarity, I think who you actually are and what you actually at core believe does show up in your the people you're leading, discipling, however you want to pronounce it or say it, and your children. My kids value the Bible and the Word and working on it and trying to understand it. And I'm not saying that to make me feel good. I'm telling you that they're in their 30s and that's who they are. Even the one who doesn't go to church, that if he's thinking about it, he doesn't reference church other than the social side. When he's thinking about faith, he's referencing understanding Scripture. And the people who intern with me and the leaders that work with me, that's what came across. That said, because that sounds like I'm going, here's my brag and my flex. That's not what I'm trying to say.
I know what you're saying.
What my kids don't necessarily value, they value church to some degree, but not in the sense as it being primary. Like, I can't be close to God without church or something like that. And it's because there was a different value in me, regardless of how I might have spoken about it. And I have to be okay with that, or I have to accept that is a reality.
Yeah, man, I'm just struck by, even in our conversation, we seem to be it's inevitable, this bifurcation of church activities and family activities. But I wish it could be another way. And I think it used to be in more communal first century culture, for example, and surely other places around the world where this is much more a way of life with a community than it is with us. And I think that's a wrinkle to this kind of go to church and leave church, as opposed to just living with the church in ways that don't seem as possible now, even with how spread out everything is. So many wrinkles to this conversation. Joe, you have been quiet and listening. Do you want to help us land this thing somewhere?
Well,
how do we land it?
Well, we're not going to solve the world's problems today, so or the church's problems.
Yeah.
But I can just share like what we've done, and is we've taken these students who, I mean, they've gone through the children's programs, right? You know, you can name your acronym children's program, and our kids have gone through it, right? And then they come into our student ministry, and it's like we're flipping everything they know upside down. Because, you know, I'm not blasting a kids program or whatever. It's just when they come in, yeah, they may have memorized, 3,000 verses or whatever. Like, it's a little bit of exaggeration, but that's great. But if this isn't transforming your life, then like, I don't know that we're doing them the service we need to be doing them. And so what we've done is we've just set up groups where we're teaching each other communally how to read the Bible and how to pray and how to practice spiritual disciplines. So, and a big one is Sabbath. Like, yo, take a break. All right. Slow down.
Yeah.
So we're reading the Bible, we're praying together, we're fasting, we're Sabbath, we practice these different things. And then we don't just say, all right, hey, you passed your Sabbath class. It's like, no, you have a group of people that are around you that are never going to come into our church.
Yeah.
But you have a relationship with them. And so go do this with them. And so what's been really cool is we started doing this, like I said, 5 or 6 years ago, and I still have a couple groups that have stemmed from the first groups we did. And they were middle schoolers then, and now they're seniors in high school now. And they're still doing this sort of thing. And so we're training our adult volunteers, we're training the students who want to, because let's face it, not everybody wants to.
Yeah.
And one of the plumb lines like that we have as a ministry is like, we can't want it more than you want it. Like, we're not going to force it. Like Susie, like we're not going to force it.
Yeah.
But if you want this, we're going to walk with you. We're going to find answers to your questions. We're going to teach you how to do these things. And then so we send them off to school, and now we as a ministry are reaping the reward of seeing them come back home, and now they're youth leaders. And now they're active in our church.
Oh man, right? That's cool.
And I'm getting messages like, being in these groups and learning how to read the Bible and the stuff that you taught and the stuff I experienced here, it prepared me for college and for ministry in college. Because I tell them, like, if you want to be successful spiritually, you better get plugged into a church, and you can't just sit there. Like, you need to be active, right? And so they're doing this, and they're coming back. They have this other outside experience, and now they're pouring into other students. And I think that's what we get with this disciple making process. We're making disciples who make disciples.
Yeah.
And so not that is how everyone is going to operate, and not that that's the way to fix all of, the issues that are going on with this deconstruction and lack of reconstruction movement, if that's what we want to call it. But I think it's going to put a dent in it, and it's going to start to prepare this current generation to do something previous generations didn't have. And hopefully it's just going to keep trickling down.
Well, yeah, I appreciate your emphasis on the generational ministry. This is a long, slow game we're playing here, this union with Christ and his body. And I think it's encouraging to me to hear that you have been faithful enough in one place to be able to see the fruits of generational ministry. So many of us are so transitory that the kids that I baptized 10 years ago are off in other places now, and I'm not churching with them because our church shut down, and I don't get to see this quite like you do. And that's really encouraging. And I think, as you're saying, kind of points us in a good direction of deep rootedness, relational community and just faithfulness and patience. Susie, I think, as you say too, a reliance on the Lord who is at work and cares more deeply for our kids than we ever could, and grandkids more than we ever could. So,
Dan, I have if it's okay, a question for Dr. Moore. Mm-hmm. I, at some point, have grown a value for grit, what I'll call grit, the ability, because ministry can be a challenge and is a challenge. Just life as a Christian is a challenge. I mean, some of this is what we're talking about, right? What role, and if there is a strong role in the issue in grit, or I don't know, whatever, because there's courage involved, right? And stick-to-itiveness, perseverance and stuff like that. How do you conceive of these things when we're working with disciples, when we're working with other Jesus followers, when we're working with our community, however you want to conceive it? But what role, what I'll call grit, and perseverance do you see, and how to pass it on?
Greg, that's an excellent question. What I've determined, even in the classroom, is something that an old pastor taught me, was that not everybody comes to church for the same reason. And for those persons that are really going after it, those are the people that you make the disciples. Those are the ones that you pour into their lives and walk with, so that transformation can take place. And then we remember the disciple-making process. Once you build a relationship, get them to make that declaration unto salvation, and then they're developed as disciples. Then we can deploy those persons back out into the world to make new disciples. And so the process then, as I see it, is the antagonists of the faith will always be there, because they were there at the time of the text with Jesus. And so we have to just continue to press our way in spite of those antagonists, and build hedges of protection around those newbies in the faith who really want to stretch out, as Paul said, and press toward that mark. And as long as we're doing that and providing space for them to do that, I believe, it's my suspicion that the naysayers, more and more, as they see people growing in faith, the quality of their lives beginning to change, they'll begin to say, there may be something about this after all, especially those that continue to come to the building and not the body. They're in the building, but they're not in the body. And so eventually, if they keep coming around, they'll be convicted by the sheer power of faith that's exuding out of others who have come in after them, who've come in before them, but are accepting Christ and doing the things that Christ would have them do in building the kingdom right where they are. So that's what I would say. Put more attention on those who want it and less attention on those that don't.
Yeah. That's a good word. That's a good word. So there's a selectivity or discretion, even strategic investment to be able to continue to show grit. I think. Yeah, I appreciate that, Donnell. We should wrap up. I have really enjoyed this. We might just make this a recurring series, Issues in Ministry. You guys have been so fun. I've loved it. I love you guys, and having gotten to teach you and work alongside you, I think it's a real treat. And I know I speak for Donnell too, to get to hear you guys really pour out some of the wisdom that you have and from your own context and experience. So it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Joe, for bringing this up and for taking one for the team here and leading the way. And thank you as well, Susie and Greg, and of course, Donnell as well, for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it. Really enjoyed this.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
I'd like to remind you that if you have any questions or comments with regards to the podcast content or any suggestions for future podcast topics, you can email us at podcast@pillarseminary.org. I can't promise that we'll necessarily get to it as a podcast topic, but we will do our best to interact with you and get your questions answered and respond to your comments in a timely fashion.
Thanks for listening to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Please visit us on the web at pillarseminary.org to find out more about our academic degree programs and non-credit learning opportunities. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and podcasting platforms. Thanks again for listening.